They laughed at me for being adopted. Little did they know I would inherit the $1 billion they all dreamed of. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Samantha Hayes, and growing up wasn't easy. I was adopted into the Johnson family when I was just a baby, and from the very start, I felt out of place. My adoptive parents never hid their disappointment that I wasn't their biological child, and my siblings always made it worse. They would whisper about me at family dinners, laugh at my mistakes, and treat me like an outsider in a home that was supposed to feel safe. I often wondered why they treated me this way, why love seemed conditional, and why my place in the family always felt temporary. Despite the hurt, I tried to focus on school and my own small victories, but the sting of rejection never left me. I would lie awake at night thinking about my real parents. I had only vague stories about them, how they were wealthy, successful, and mysteriously absent from my life. I didn't know why they had given me up or where they were, but there was always a sense that I came from a life completely different from the one I knew. The idea of them always lingered in my mind, a mixture of curiosity, longing, and a quiet hope that one day I might understand. As I got older, I noticed the Johnsons' greed and arrogance. They flaunted what they had, acted superior, and assumed that I would never amount to anything. Every insult, every sneer, made me quietly determined. I wasn't going to let them define who I was. I would find my own way, even if they didn't see it coming. Then, one day, a letter arrived that changed everything. It was from a law firm I had never heard of, addressed to me in crisp, formal handwriting. My heart raced as I opened it, and as I read, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My biological parents had left behind a fortune, an inheritance that no one in my adoptive family even suspected. The magnitude of it was staggering, almost unbelievable. For the first time, I felt a shift in the balance of my life. This was my chance, not just to claim what was rightfully mine, but to step into a world I had only heard about in stories. It wasn't about revenge yet, though a small part of me couldn't ignore the thought of how shocked the Johnsons would be. More than anything, it was about finally proving to myself that I mattered. That the girl they laughed at, mocked, and dismissed had value beyond their cruelty. I was nervous, but also excited. Everything I had been through, the pain, the rejection, the loneliness, had prepared me for this moment. I knew this was just the beginning, and as I held the letter in my hands, I realized that my life was about to change in ways I had never imagined. The journey ahead would test me, but for the first time I felt powerful, seen, and ready to claim the life I was always meant to have. Life with the Johnsons was far from easy. From the moment I arrived, I could feel their eyes on me, judging me for not being one of them. My adoptive parents, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, never hid their disappointment. They constantly reminded me, either directly or with sharp comments, that I wasn't their real child. Even my siblings, Dylan and Rachel, joined in, whispering cruel jokes when they thought I couldn't hear. Every day felt like walking on a tightrope, trying to prove I belonged in a family that made me feel like I didn't. School was no better. Kids would hear my story about being adopted, and some treated me like I was different, like I didn't deserve the same opportunities. At times, classmates would make jokes in front of my family during school events. I remember one painfully clear memory, a family dinner where Dylan laughed loudly, "She's not even really ours. How can we take her seriously?" My parents just smiled awkwardly, not defending me. That night, I cried in my room, feeling small, invisible, and unloved. Family gatherings were even worse. I was often left out of conversations or teased for my clothes, my hair, or the way I spoke. My cousins, who were always the center of attention, would brag about their lives while I sat quietly, hoping not to draw attention. The constant ridicule became a heavy weight on my heart, but it also planted a quiet determination inside me. I told myself that one day, I would show them they had underestimated me. Through all this, I never stopped thinking about my biological parents. I had only pieces of information about them, stories that seemed almost like legends. Some relatives mentioned their success, wealth, and mysterious lifestyle. It was like a secret thread of hope woven into my life, proof that my beginnings were different and that there was more to me than the Johnsons could ever see. I would imagine a world where my past mattered, where I could find what was missing, and maybe even claim what was rightfully mine. Despite feeling rejected and mocked every day, I worked hard at school, learned everything I could, and tried to stay strong. Each insult, each laugh at my expense, became fuel for my ambition. I wanted to make a life where I was respected and valued, where the people who had dismissed me would see the truth of who I was. That tiny seed of hope about my birth parents' life and potential inheritance kept me going, even on my darkest days. Looking back, those years of struggle shaped me. They taught me resilience, patience, and the drive to fight for what I deserved. The Johnsons believed they could define me with their mockery, but little did they know, those very moments were building the foundation for the day I would rise above them, stronger, wiser, and ready to claim what was always mine. One ordinary morning, a letter arrived that would change my life forever. It came in a thick envelope with an official-looking seal from a law firm I had never heard of. My hand shook as I opened it, and as I read the words, I could hardly believe what I was seeing. The letter stated that I, Samantha Hayes, was the sole heir to a fortune valued at $1 billion, left to me by my late biological parents. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake, maybe even a cruel joke, but the details matched what little I knew about them. My heart raced as I reread the letter. My parents had been incredibly wealthy, their lives filled with luxury, business empires, and influence that I had only ever imagined. They had passed away suddenly, leaving everything to me. The letter explained that they had always wanted to ensure I would be taken care of, but my adoptive family had tried to prevent any connection, hoping to keep me unaware and powerless. It was shocking to realize that all these years, the Johnsons had not only mocked me but had actively tried to block me from the life I was meant to have. I felt a whirlwind of emotions. First came disbelief. I kept rereading the letter, half expecting it to vanish or reveal itself as a scam. Then came anger. How dare the Johnsons try to control my life, keep me in the shadows, and laugh at my struggles while this incredible opportunity was mine by right? A part of me burned with the idea of revenge, imagining the shock on their faces when they realized that the girl they dismissed had inherited more than they could ever dream of. At the same time, excitement bubbled inside me. For the first time, I could see a future where I had real power, where my life was no longer dictated by their cruelty. The thought of being able to claim what was rightfully mine, to live without their insults and control, filled me with a mix of fear and thrill. I imagined stepping into a world I had only dreamed about, full of possibilities and freedom. But alongside excitement and anger, there was also uncertainty. Could I really take this inheritance? Would I be able to navigate a world that had been completely hidden from me? The temptation to use this fortune as a way to prove the Johnsons wrong tugged at me constantly. I knew that my next steps would be crucial, not just for claiming the inheritance, but for asserting my place in a life I had been denied. Sitting there with the letter in my hands, I realized that my life had shifted in an instant. The pain, humiliation, and rejection I had endured were now matched by an opportunity to rise above it all. For the first time, I understood that my story was far from over, and the girl who had once been laughed at was about to step into a world where she could finally be seen, respected, and unstoppable. It didn't take long for the news of my inheritance to reach the Johnsons. Dylan, my adoptive brother, was the first to find out. The moment he saw the letter lying on the table, his eyes widened, and I could feel the gears turning in his head. He smirked, thinking this was just another phase, that I would somehow fumble and let it slip away. But I knew Dylan well enough. He was greedy, arrogant, and always looking for a way to turn things in his favor. Almost immediately, he began plotting. He tried to approach me casually, acting concerned while slipping in little manipulative comments. "Are you sure you know what you're doing, Sam? Managing that kind of money isn't easy," he said, smiling as if he were helping me. But I could see through him. Every word, every gesture, was meant to intimidate me, to make me doubt myself. He wanted me to fail so he could swoop in and control the fortune he believed should have been his. Dylan didn't stop there. At family gatherings, he would casually drop remarks about wealth and inheritance, always watching my reaction. You know, handling $1 billion isn't for everyone. Some people just aren't cut out for it, he said one evening, laughing along with our parents, who nodded silently, pretending they weren't involved. Their arrogance made my blood boil. They truly believed that I was weak, that I couldn't fight for what was mine. Even my adoptive mother tried to sway me, making thinly veiled comments about responsibility and the dangers of wealth. It's not just about money, Samantha. You have to be careful who you trust, she said, clearly trying to plant doubt in my mind. But each attempt to control or intimidate me only strengthened my resolve. I realized that their greed had blinded them, they underestimated me completely. Despite their schemes, I stayed calm. I listened, observed, and took mental notes. Every smirk, every insult, every manipulative word became part of a bigger picture. I understood their tactics, and I knew I had to be strategic. This wasn't just about proving them wrong, it was about protecting what was rightfully mine and showing them that their mockery and greed would not define my life. As tension in the house grew, I felt a quiet satisfaction. They thought they were in control, that I was inexperienced and fragile. But inside, I was preparing my moves carefully. Every interaction became a lesson, every sneer a reminder that I had the upper hand if I played my cards right. The Johnsons didn't know it yet, but their arrogance was about to meet the consequences of underestimating me. For the first time, I felt fully aware of the game I was in. It was no longer just about inheritance, it was about strategy, patience, and timing. And I was ready to step forward, not as the girl they laughed at, but as someone they would soon realize could not be ignored or defeated. After realizing how greedy and manipulative the Johnsons were, I knew I had to be smart. I couldn't let their arrogance or schemes stop me from claiming what was rightfully mine. I started spending hours researching everything I could about inheritance laws, financial management, and how to protect my rights. I read articles, watched interviews, and even reached out to experts online. The more I learned, the more confident I became. Knowledge was my shield, and I intended to use it wisely. That's when Marcus entered the picture. He was an old friend and a sharp, trustworthy lawyer who had always believed in me. When I told him about the inheritance and the Johnsons' attempts to manipulate me, he didn't hesitate. "We'll make sure this goes exactly the way it should," he said. His calm confidence gave me courage, and together we started planning my steps carefully. Marcus helped me understand the legal requirements, the timelines, and the potential obstacles my adoptive family might throw at me. I also began thinking like a strategist. Every move I made had a purpose, every conversation I had with the Johnsons was measured. I started keeping records, noting every comment, every attempt to intimidate me, and every lie they told. These small details would later help me show the truth about their greed. It was empowering to realize that I didn't have to react emotionally. Instead, I could observe, prepare, and strike at the right moment. As I immersed myself in this process, I felt a change in myself. The timid, unsure girl who had endured years of mockery was slowly transforming into someone strong, patient, and decisive. I practiced speaking clearly, negotiating confidently, and asserting myself. I learned that power didn't come from anger, it came from preparation and knowledge. Each day, I grew more certain that I could outsmart the very people who had tried to control me for so long. I also started imagining how the Johnsons would react when they realized I wasn't just a passive target anymore. I could see their arrogance cracking, their smug faces falling when they discovered that I had anticipated their every move. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of spite, it was about justice, about proving that their attempts to hold me back had failed. Every small victory in my planning brought me closer to that moment. I felt my confidence building with each step, and I knew the time was coming when I would confront them not as the girl they ridiculed, but as a woman who had learned how to play the game better than they ever could. The more I prepared, the more I realized that I was ready, not just to claim my inheritance, but to expose the greed and cruelty of the family who had once made me feel worthless. By the time I was ready to move forward, I wasn't scared anymore. I was determined. I had a plan, an ally I could trust, and a clear vision of how to turn the tables. The Johnsons had underestimated me for too long, and now, I was about to show them exactly what that mistake would cost them. The day I decided to confront the Johnsons, I felt calm but focused. I had gathered enough evidence, documents, emails, and recordings, that showed their attempts to block me from claiming my inheritance. I knew that presenting it carefully was the key. I waited until we were all at the family home, sitting in the living room, and then I began. "I know everything," I said, my voice steady. "All the times you tried to control me, block me, and keep me from what was rightfully mine, I have proof." I handed Marcus a folder with all the evidence and let them see it. For a moment, there was silence. Then Dylan's face turned red, and his hands trembled. What is this?" he stammered, trying to regain control. Their parents looked shocked too. Mrs. Johnson's eyes filled with fear, and Mr. Johnson stammered, "Samantha, we were just trying to help," but no one believed him. Their arrogance was gone, replaced with panic. They realized that I wasn't the helpless girl they thought I was. I stayed calm, speaking slowly, making sure they felt the weight of their actions. "Helping? You called me worthless, mocked me, and tried to make sure I never got what I deserved. This isn't help. This is greed." Then came the betrayal I had suspected. A distant relative, Aunt Linda, who I had once trusted, tried to intervene on their side. "Samantha, you shouldn't be doing this. You don't understand," she started, but I had already anticipated her move. I calmly showed that I had records of her meetings with Dylan, planning ways to block my inheritance. The look of shock on her face was priceless. She realized I had been one step ahead all along. Dylan tried to argue, shouting that the fortune was too much for me to handle, but I stayed composed. "You always underestimated me," I said. "You thought I couldn't fight back. Well, here I am. I know your plans, and they won't work." My calmness only made their panic worse. They were used to me being timid, but now they saw a side of me they never expected, a woman ready to claim what was hers. I could see the tension in the room, the fear, and the disbelief. For the first time, the Johnsons were on the defensive. I didn't need to yell or threaten, the evidence spoke for itself. Every attempt to intimidate me, every whisper behind my back, had been recorded. They realized they had lost control, and there was nothing they could do to turn it around. By the end of the confrontation, I felt a sense of justice. The room was heavy with their shame, and I stayed firm, knowing I had exposed their true selves. The betrayal from Aunt Linda stung at first, but it was also proof that I had planned carefully. Nothing could surprise me anymore. I had faced their greed, their manipulation, and even their allies, and I had come out stronger, ready for the next step in claiming what was mine. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I felt a mixture of nerves and determination. This was the moment I had been preparing for, the moment I would officially claim what was rightfully mine. Marcus stood by my side, calm and reassuring, while I carried the folder of evidence that documented every attempt my adoptive family had made to block me. As we entered the courtroom, I noticed the Johnsons sitting together, their faces a mix of disbelief, anger, and panic. Dylan's smug expression was gone, replaced with unease. Mrs. Johnson kept whispering to Mr. Johnson, but I could see that even their whispered plans wouldn't work here. They had underestimated me for too long. The judge called the session to order, and as the proceedings began, I presented my case clearly and confidently. I explained my parents' intentions, the inheritance, and the attempts made by my adoptive family to interfere. Every fact was backed by documents, emails, and recordings. I spoke slowly and calmly, making sure that each point was understood, and that my composure contrasted sharply with their nervous energy. At one moment, I couldn't help but flash back to my childhood, dinners where Dylan mocked me, school events where my cousins laughed at me, and countless nights spent crying alone in my room. Those memories fueled my words, but I didn't let them show my pain. Instead, I turned them into strength, proving that every insult and humiliation had only made me stronger. The courtroom fell silent as Marcus handed over the final piece of evidence. The Johnsons tried to interject, but the judge would not allow it. Their disbelief was palpable. Dylan's face went pale, Mrs. Johnson looked like she might faint, and Mr. Johnson stared at me as if he couldn't believe the girl they had laughed at was now standing tall, in full control of her destiny. When the judge finally declared that the inheritance was officially mine, I felt a wave of relief and vindication. It wasn't just about the money, it was about everything the Johnsons had tried to take from me, my confidence, my dignity, and my place in the world. The $1 billion fortune symbolized that I had survived their cruelty, outsmarted their schemes, and emerged stronger. As I left the courtroom, I noticed people looking at me with respect, some even in awe. I walked past the Johnsons, who avoided my eyes, their shame evident. For the first time, I felt completely seen and recognized for who I truly was. The fortune was mine, yes, but the real victory was proving that the girl they mocked and underestimated had become unstoppable. That day, I realized that I wasn't defined by their cruelty or their laughter. I was defined by my courage, my patience, and my determination. And as I stepped out of the courtroom, I felt free, free from the past, free from their mockery, and ready to build a life that no one could ever take from me. Once I had secured the inheritance, I began building a life that reflected not just wealth, but freedom and purpose. I invested wisely, started businesses I had dreamed about, and supported causes that mattered to me. Every decision was strategic, designed to grow my opportunities while keeping me in full control. I wanted to live a life my adoptive family could never imagine, and I wanted them to see it, not out of spite, but as a natural result of my strength and determination. I often ran into the Johnsons socially, and each encounter reminded me of how far I had come. They would glance at my elegant car, my confidence, and the circles I now moved in, clearly uncomfortable. Dylan once tried to act casual at a charity event, but I could see the tension in his face as people congratulated me on my successful ventures. Mrs. Johnson mentioned my name in passing to neighbors, her tone strained, clearly aware that I had surpassed them in every way. Each moment was a quiet, poetic justice, proof that they had underestimated me, and that their mockery no longer had power over me. I also used my wealth privately, helping friends and strangers in ways the Johnsons could never even think of. I supported young women who had been ridiculed or ignored, giving them opportunities for education and careers. I funded scholarships, started mentorship programs, and quietly ensured that my generosity reached those who needed it most. The Johnsons had always judged people by what they could take, while I built with care and intention. There were small, almost symbolic moments that reminded me of my victory. I remember Dylan struggling to sell a car he had invested in, while I drove past in a sleek new vehicle I had purchased for business purposes. I once attended a social gala where the Johnsons were present. They were seated at the back while I was recognized on stage for a philanthropic achievement. Their discomfort was visible, but I never gloated. I understood that dignity was far more powerful than revenge, and that my success itself was the statement I needed to make. Even in personal interactions, I stayed calm and composed. When my adoptive mother tried to engage me in conversation about family matters, I listened politely but did not allow her guilt or manipulation to sway me. I had learned that true power was silent and steady. Every decision I made reinforced that I had reclaimed control over my life, and no one could take that away. Through it all, I felt a sense of peace. The Johnsons' arrogance and greed no longer affected me, they were reminders of a past I had outgrown. I had turned the tables not by fighting with anger, but by building a life they could never touch. My wealth was more than money, it was freedom, recognition, and a proof of my resilience. The girl they once laughed at had risen above their cruelty, and every success reminded me, and quietly reminded them, of the strength they had never seen coming. Looking back on everything that had happened, I felt a mix of emotions. The journey from being the girl the Johnsons mocked to someone who had claimed her rightful inheritance was more than just about money, it had been about finding myself and proving my own worth. I realized that true victory wasn't in humiliating them or flaunting my success, but in knowing that I had survived, grown, and thrived despite their cruelty. I often thought about my childhood, the moments when I felt invisible at family dinners, the nights I cried alone after hearing Dylan's cruel jokes, and the times my adoptive parents pretended I didn't matter. Those memories were painful, but they also reminded me of how far I had come. Each insult had pushed me to be stronger, each sneer had driven me to work harder, and every act of dismissal had taught me patience and resilience. I also reflected on the people who had supported me along the way. Marcus, my friend and lawyer, had never doubted me, and his faith had given me courage when I wasn't sure I could succeed. I thought about the mentors and friends I had met after gaining my inheritance, people who inspired me to use my wealth and influence responsibly. These connections reminded me that success wasn't just about financial gain, it was about growth, relationships, and the impact I could have on others. The Johnsons' downfall was quiet but undeniable. They struggled financially, socially, and emotionally, and it was clear they hadn't expected me to rise so fully. Yet I didn't gloat or seek revenge, their suffering was simply the natural result of their arrogance and greed. My satisfaction came from knowing that I had proven myself, that I had built a life rooted in my own effort and integrity, rather than taking from others or depending on their approval. I also allowed myself small, human moments of reflection. I remembered the simple joys I had neglected as a child, the freedom to make choices for myself, to travel, to learn new things, and to explore opportunities without fear. I laughed quietly at my old insecurities, realizing how much they had shaped me into the person I had become. These small moments made me feel grounded, reminding me that despite the drama and conflict, I was still human and still growing. Ultimately, I understood that my journey had given me more than wealth or power. It had taught me self-respect, resilience, and forgiveness. I had faced betrayal, cruelty, and doubt, yet I had emerged with dignity and confidence. The girl the Johnsons had laughed at had become a woman who knew her worth, and that knowledge was the most valuable inheritance of all. Standing at the balcony of my new home, I took a deep breath and looked out at the life I had built. Every decision, every challenge, and every moment of doubt had led me here. I felt a calm strength inside me, a certainty that I had done what I needed to do without losing myself along the way. My fortune was secured, yes, but more than that, my integrity and self-respect were intact. I often thought about the people who had doubted me, laughed at me, and tried to keep me small. The Johnsons had underestimated me at every turn, thinking that their cruelty and manipulation could define my life. But they were wrong. Each act of mockery, each dismissive comment, had only pushed me to rise higher. I realized that the true measure of success wasn't just money or power, it was proving to yourself that you are capable, strong, and worthy of respect. Looking back, I remembered the nights I had spent crying alone, feeling unwanted and rejected. I remembered the whispers and laughter that followed me through family gatherings and school events. Those memories were still painful, but they no longer held me back. Instead, they reminded me of how much I had grown and how far I had come. I had turned the hurt into motivation, and that transformation was more powerful than anything my adoptive family could have imagined. I thought about the lessons I wanted to share with others. Life would always have people who doubted you, who tried to hold you back, and who sought to define your worth by their own standards. But giving in to their negativity only limits your potential. True victory comes from rising above, from working hard, and from claiming the life you are meant to have. I had achieved that, not through anger or revenge, but through patience, intelligence, and perseverance. As I stood there, I whispered quietly to myself, never let anyone's ignorance define you. If they doubted you, let your life be the story they never saw coming. Those words carried all the weight of my journey, the pain, the struggle, the growth, and finally, the triumph. I didn't need to shout them, and I didn't need to gloat. My life itself was the message, clear for anyone paying attention. With a deep sense of satisfaction, I felt free. I had confronted betrayal, faced doubt, and claimed what was mine, all while staying true to who I was. The Johnsons' mockery no longer mattered. Their schemes, their greed, and their disbelief had all been overcome by my determination and resilience. I had my fortune, yes, but I also had something far more valuable, self-respect, dignity, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had achieved justice without compromising my morals. In that moment, I understood the full meaning of triumph. It wasn't about making them suffer, it was about becoming unstoppable, about living a life that reflected my worth. And as I turned from the balcony and walked into the future I had created, I knew that every step I took would be a testament to the strength and courage I had discovered within myself.